I'm sorry, she said suddenly. Ethan turned to her. For what? She hesitated, her voice trembling. For pulling away. After your father died, I didn't know how to be anything to anyone. Her eyes glistened in the candlelight. I know you lost him too. I just never said it out loud. Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded, his jaw tightening. I get it. We both lost him. But I didn't know how to reach you either. It felt like we were strangers living in the same house. His honesty stung, but she knew he was right. They had both been trapped in their own silence, afraid to face the other because it reminded them of what they'd lost. I thought if I stayed busy, if I didn't look back, maybe it would hurt less, she whispered. Ethan looked at her carefully. Did it? She shook her head, a faint, tired smile forming. Not even for a day. For a while, neither spoke. The storm faded into a soft drizzle, the sound of raindrops tapping gently on the roof. The house felt calm for the first time that night. Ethan reached over, adjusting one of the candles that was about to burn out. His hand brushed against hers by accident, but the touch froze them both. Not because of attraction, but because it carried warmth neither expected. It was human, simple, and filled with the kind of quiet care that had been missing from their lives. He drew his hand back quickly. Sorry, he muttered. Claire smiled faintly. It's fine, she said softly. And it was. It wasn't about romance, it was about two people realizing they had both been living with ghosts. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lift slightly. You remind me of him sometimes, she said, her voice warm now. But you're not him. You're your own person, Ethan, and he'd be proud of that. Her words caught him off guard. He blinked, trying to hide the emotion rising in his eyes. You think so? He asked quietly. I know, so she replied with certainty. The candle flickered low, and for a moment their faces were half in light, half in shadow. It felt symbolic, like both were stepping out of the darkness of loss. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. It's strange, he said. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. Claire looked toward the rain-streaked window and smiled faintly. We all need to be reminded we're not alone sometimes. As the night deepened, they kept talking about small things, memories, even silly stories. Laughter returned in quiet bursts, breaking the heaviness that had filled the house for years. When the candles began to burn low, Claire stood up to fetch new ones. But Ethan stopped her. You've done enough. I'll get them. She watched him move around the kitchen with ease, lighting new candles, checking windows. He carried a calm presence that comforted her. For the first time since her husband's death, she didn't feel like she was carrying everything alone. When she sat back down, Ethan joined her again, and for a few long moments they just listened to the rhythm of the rain. The storm had turned from violent to soothing, and so had the air between them. Claire finally said, "Thank you for being here tonight." Ethan gave her a puzzled smile. "Where else would I be?" She chuckled softly. "Somewhere with friends. You're young. You should be out there, not stuck in the dark with me." He shook his head. "You're not just stuck in the dark, Claire. You're home." Those simple words warmed her in a way that tea and candles couldn't. She looked at him, and for the first time saw not the shadow of her husband's son, but someone who had stayed, who had chosen to care even when things were hard. The rain began to ease completely. Outside, the world was still and clean, washed of noise. Inside, something had quietly healed. They didn't need to say anything more. The silence wasn't heavy. Any more, it was peaceful, full of unspoken understanding. Claire leaned back, her eyes drifting shut for a moment. Ethan stayed beside her, quiet, thoughtful, watching the flame dance between them. Neither knew what the morning would bring, but both understood one thing clearly. Now sometimes a blackout doesn't take the light away. Sometimes it helps you find it again. And as the last candle flickered, the storm passed, leaving behind a calm that neither had felt in years, a calm that whispered of forgiveness, healing, and the chance to start over. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by midnight, but the power was still gone. The candles had melted low, and the house was filled with a faint golden light that flickered with every draft. Emily sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, listening to the quiet hum of the storm outside. The air smelled like wet earth and wax. It was peaceful, now almost too peaceful. Daniel had gone outside a few minutes earlier to check the fuse box, even though she told him not to. She heard the back door creak open, then shut again. Moments later, he walked back in, hair damp, shirt clinging to his shoulders. He was holding a small flashlight that barely worked. "No luck," he said, shaking his head. "Everything's soaked. I'll try again in the morning." Emily smiled faintly. "I told you it could wait. You're drenched." He rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "Yeah, you were right. Again." "Here," she said, grabbing a towel from the armchair and handing it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly. He took it and started drying his hair, laughing softly when his reflection flickered in the candlelight. "You always think of everything," he said. "I forgot how prepared you are for blackouts." "Comes with living in Oregon," she replied, sitting back. "You learn to expect rain and power cuts." He nodded, settling on the couch across from her. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of rain outside and the occasional pop of wax as it dripped onto the glass holders. Then, in that stillness, Daniel said quietly, "I used to hate nights like this. After Dad died, the quiet made it worse." Emily's heart tightened. She hadn't expected him to bring that up so suddenly. "I know," she said softly. "I hated it too. The silence used to feel like it was shouting at me." Daniel looked down, twisting the towel in his hands. "I didn't even say goodbye to him properly. We had a fight the week before, and I never fixed it. I thought I'd have time." Emily leaned forward, her voice gentle. "You were young, Daniel. None of us ever think time runs out." He met her eyes, his expression raw. "You handled everything. The house, the funeral, all of it. I don't know how you did it." She shook her head. "I didn't handle it. I just kept moving. When I stopped, it hurt too much." For a moment, neither spoke. The truth of grief hung heavy in the air. But it wasn't unbearable, it was shared. The candlelight flickered between them, throwing small shadows across the room. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You know, I used to come home from college just to check if you were okay. I'd tell myself it was about the house, but it wasn't. I just didn't like knowing you were alone here." Emily's eyes softened. "You always did have your father's heart," she whispered. "He worried about everyone before himself." Daniel smiled faintly, his voice low. "Maybe I got that from both of you." Her chest tightened. There was warmth in his tone, but also something deeper, something careful and sincere. She didn't know what to call it, but it felt safe. The storm outside began to fade. The rain now, no more than a soft whisper on the roof. The world felt small, quiet, and honest. Emily realized how long it had been since she'd had a real conversation with anyone, not small talk. Not polite words, but something true. She leaned back on the couch, her voice calm. "Your father always said you'd do great things. He believed in you more than anyone." Daniel smiled sadly. "I wish I could tell him that I'm finally getting somewhere. My new job's not perfect, but it feels right. I think he'd be proud." "He would," she said firmly. "He always was." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "And what about you, Emily? Are you okay now?" She hesitated. It was a simple question, but the answer wasn't. "Some days," she said finally. "Other days, not really. But tonight feels different." He tilted his head. "Different how?" She smiled softly. "Because I'm not alone." That silence came again, not empty this time, but full of things they didn't need to say. The distance between them felt smaller. There was no tension, no confusion, just understanding. Daniel got up to adjust a candle that was nearly burned out. The light flickered across his face as he set it down, and when he turned back, their eyes met again. He looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had finally stopped running from something. "You should get some rest," Emily said gently. "It's late." "I'm not that tired," he said, sitting down again. "I just don't want the night to end yet." She smiled faintly. "Neither do I." For a while, they just sat there, letting the minutes pass. The house, once filled with the sound of wind and thunder, now felt calm. The storm outside had gone, but a different kind of stillness had taken its place. Soft, healing, real. Daniel broke the silence again, his voice thoughtful. I used to think of you as just my stepmom. Kind, but distant. I didn't really understand what you were going through after Dad died. I was angry at everything back then. Psh, I know, she said. Grief does that. It makes you push people away. He nodded. But tonight, I get it. You were trying to hold things together for both of us. Emily smiled gently. I tried. But I didn't always succeed. You did better than you think, he said quietly. That made her laugh softly. You sound too grown up now. What happened to the boy who used to argue with me about bedtime? He grinned. He grew up, but he still remembers the woman who made hot cocoa during every storm. Her heart softened at that. There it was again, the memory that tied them both to the same man, the same home, the same love. It wasn't romantic, but it was deeply human to people who had once shared a family, now finding comfort in what was left of it. Another candle burned low, and Daniel reached out to pinch the flame before it went out. For a second, the room dimmed, and the faint light made his face look older, wiser. I don't think I've ever really thanked you, he said, for everything you did for Dad. And for me, you don't have to, she said softly. He loved you more than anything, and you gave me a reason to keep going. When he looked at her then, his eyes held something: unspoken gratitude, affection, and maybe a little sorrow. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like closure. The clock ticked somewhere in the hallway, the sound steady and sure. Emily realized she wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. The night didn't feel lonely, felt alive, like it was holding something sacred. Daniel stood, stretched, and smiled. I'll stay on the couch tonight, just in case the power comes back suddenly. She nodded. Good idea. And thank you, Daniel, for being here. He smiled softly. Anytime, Emily. Really? When she went upstairs, she paused at the landing and looked back. He was sitting on the couch, the last candle flickering beside him, his expression calm and thoughtful. She felt a quiet peace she hadn't felt in years. Outside, the first stars appeared through the thinning clouds. The storm was over. Inside, two people who had both lost something had found a little bit of themselves again, in honesty, in forgiveness, and in the kind of silence that heals. That night, Emily finally slept deeply, knowing that when morning came, the house would no longer feel quite so empty. The first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, soft and pale after the long night of rain. The storm was finally gone. The world outside looked washed clean. The driveway glistened. The trees sparkled with drops of water, and the air smelled new. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator that had come back to life. The power had returned. Emily opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she wasn't sure what time it was or how long she had slept. The night had felt endless, but strangely comforting. She sat up in bed, listening to the steady rhythm of the house coming back to normal. Somewhere downstairs, she could hear faint movement. Daniel. She got out of bed, wrapped her robe around her shoulders, and went downstairs. The candles from last night were melted to the base, and the soft smell of wax still lingered. Daniel was in the kitchen making coffee. His hair was still slightly messy, and his voice was low as he hummed a tune she didn't recognize. The sight made her smile. Morning, she said gently. He turned, surprised but smiling. Hey, you're up. Power's back. I noticed, she said, looking around. It feels strange to see the lights again. Yeah, he said, handing her a mug. Almost too bright after last night. She took the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Thank you. You didn't have to make this. He shrugged. You made dinner? Fair trade. For a moment, they both stood in silence, sipping their coffee and listening to the birds outside. The world felt lighter now, calmer. The heaviness of last night had turned into something softer, like a shared secret they didn't need to explain. I didn't wake you earlier, Daniel said quietly. You looked peaceful. I haven't slept that well in months, she admitted. Maybe the storm helped. He smiled. Or maybe talking did? She looked up, meeting his eyes. Maybe both. He leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. It's strange, isn't it? How one night can change how you see everything. Emily nodded. It really can. She walked over to the window, watching sunlight spill over the wet street. The garden outside shimmered, the roses heavy with raindrops. It looked alive again. The rain did some good, she said softly. Daniel joined her at the window. Yeah, feels like the world's been reset. His words stayed in her mind longer than she expected. Reset, that was exactly what it felt like. For 2 years, Emily had carried a quiet sadness inside her. Losing her husband had left a space nothing could fill. She had gone through the motions, work, chores, empty dinners, but she had stopped feeling like herself. But something about last night had cracked that silence open. Daniel, she said after a pause, I'm glad you came to stay. He smiled gently. Me too. I didn't realize how much I missed being here. You're welcome any time, she said. This house was never meant to be so quiet. He looked around, nodding slowly. I can fix that. Maybe I'll help you with the garden again, like old times. She laughed softly. You were terrible at it. Exactly, he said, grinning. You'll have to supervise. The easy laughter between them felt natural, not forced. The grief that had once lived in every corner of the house didn't feel as heavy anymore. It was still there, but smaller, like a shadow that finally understood it wasn't needed all the time. Daniel poured them both another cup of coffee and sat down at the table. I was thinking, he began, maybe I'll take a few days off work. I could help you fix that leak in the back room. You shouldn't be climbing ladders alone. Emily shook her head but smiled. You don't have to do that. I know, he said simply. I want to. Something warm spread through her chest. It wasn't the kind of warmth that burned or confused. It was steady, kind, and deeply human. For so long she had tried to keep a distance, to stay composed and strong for everyone else. But sitting across from Daniel, she didn't have to pretend. She could just be. He looked at her carefully. You know, last night, when we talked about Dad, I think it helped me more than I realized. Me too, she said. I think he would have liked that we remembered him with laughter instead of tears. Daniel nodded. He would have teased us about the candles. And told us we were being dramatic, Emily added with a soft chuckle. Their laughter filled the kitchen, echoing gently through the house. It was the kind of sound that had been missing for far too long. After a while, Daniel stood and started washing the mugs. Emily watched him for a moment before speaking. You've changed, Daniel. You've grown into someone your father would be proud of. Smiled over his shoulder. That means more than you think. When he turned back around, there was something new in his expression piece. The kind that comes after years of running from memories. He looked like someone who had finally forgiven himself. I think I'm finally ready to stop living in the past, he said. Emily nodded slowly. That's a good thing. The past is heavy. You can't carry it forever. He dried his hands and leaned on the counter, studying her. What about you? Are you ready too? She thought for a moment, then smiled softly. I think so. I don't want to live with ghosts anymore. I want to live with light. Then maybe this is a good start, he said. They stood there for a while, watching the morning light grow stronger. Outside, a few neighbors stepped out, sweeping wet leaves off their porches. The world was waking up, moving forward like it always did. Daniel turned to her again, his voice gentle. I'll be here for a while, you know, until I find a new place. But if you ever need me to stay longer, just say so. She met his eyes, grateful. I might just take you up on that. He grinned. Good, then it's settled. The day stretched before them, fresh and open. Emily felt a quiet joy settle in her heart, a feeling she hadn't known in years. It wasn't romantic or confusing. It was something deeper, built from shared loss, respect, and new beginnings. The house that had once felt too big suddenly felt full again. Daniel began fixing small things around the kitchen, the loose handle on the cabinet. The flickering light bulb band Emily watched, smiling to herself. Every sound, every laugh, every small moment felt precious. By noon, the sun had broken through completely, and the house was filled with light. The shadows were gone. Emily stood by the door, watching Daniel work in the yard, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The blackout had taken the lights away for one night, but it had brought something brighter in return. It reminded her that sometimes, in the darkest hours, people find each other again, not in dramatic ways, but quietly, through small moments that matter. When Daniel came back inside, wiping his hands, she said softly, "Thank you for last night." He smiled, understanding more than the words themselves. "Thank you for letting me come home." As the day went on, laughter replaced the silence, and warmth replaced the emptiness. The storm had left its mark, but it also left behind something new: connection, forgiveness, and a quiet kind of love that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Emily looked around her bright living home and thought, sometimes it takes a blackout to remind us where the real light is. The rain had been falling since evening, soft at first, and then heavier as night came. The wind pressed against the windows, and the sky rumbled as if warning that the storm was far from over. Emily stood by the kitchen counter, stirring her tea, listening to the sound of thunder roll through the hills behind her house. She had lived in this quiet suburb outside Portland for years, long enough to know that power outages came with storms like this. Still, she wasn't ready for what the night would bring. Daniel, her stepson, had arrived that afternoon. He was staying for a few weeks until he found a new apartment closer to his new job. Emily hadn't seen him much over the past few years. He'd gone to college in another state and worked long hours after that. She remembered him as a polite, quiet teenager who helped around the house without being asked. Now he was 24, grown and confident, but with the same gentle way about him. He had his father's calmness, and every time he smiled, it reminded her of the man she had lost. Emily had tried to keep busy that evening. She'd cooked dinner, tidied the kitchen, avoided thinking too much about how strange it felt to have someone else in the house again. Since her husband passed away 2 years ago, she had gotten used to the silence. It wasn't peaceful silence, it was heavy, the kind that sits on your chest. But tonight, that silence was replaced by something else. Daniel's presence filled the house in a quiet, steady way. She caught herself listening for his footsteps, the sound of him moving around upstairs. It was strange, but comforting too. The storm outside grew stronger. Lightning flashed across the living room, lighting the space for an instant before everything plunged back into shadow. Emily sighed and reached for her phone on the counter to check the weather report, but before she could, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The house fell into darkness. "Oh, perfect," she murmured. The hum of the refrigerator stopped, and all that was left was the sound of rain pounding the roof. She remembered the flashlight in the kitchen drawer near the fridge. Carefully, she moved through the dark, using her phone's dim screen as a guide. The floor was slick near the back door where the wind had pushed rain under the crack. She took one step too quickly, slipped, and gasped. Before she could hit the ground, 2 strong arms caught her. "Will Z there?" Daniel's voice came out of the dark, firm but warm. For a moment, Emily froze. The storm raged outside, thunder echoing through the walls, but inside the house, it was strangely quiet. She could feel Daniel's arm steadying her, could hear the sound of his breath close to hers. Her heart thudded not from the fall, but from the sudden closeness. She hadn't been held like that in years. I didn't see you," she said quickly, trying to laugh it off as she found her footing again. Daniel stepped back, but didn't let go until she was steady. "You okay? The floor's soaked over here." "Yes," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I should have been more careful. I was just trying to find the flashlight." "Caught it," he said, already moving toward the drawer. He opened it easily, the sound of metal clinking as he searched. A beam of light cut through the dark when he turned the flashlight on. And for the first time, Emily could see his face, clearly wet hair. A few drops of rain on his shirt, and that calm look that always reminded her of his father. "Here," he said, handing her the light. Their fingers brushed briefly. "Thanks," she replied softly. Her voice came out quieter than she meant. Daniel gave a small smile. "No problem. You scared me for a second there. Scared myself," she said with a laugh. "I didn't think the floor would be that slippery." Lightning flashed through the window, lighting the room for a second, and in that moment, Emily noticed something: how grown Daniel looked now. There was no trace of the boy who used to leave his sneakers by the door and forget his lunch in the fridge. Time had changed him. They stood there for a moment, both unsure what to say next. The sound of the storm filled the silence. Daniel finally broke it. "It's a bad one out there. I checked the forecast earlier, might last all night." "Then we better find some candles," Emily said, trying to keep her tone light. She didn't want him to see that her hands were still trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from something else she didn't quite understand. Together they searched the kitchen drawers until they found a box of candles and some matches. Daniel set them up on the counter, and soon a soft golden glow replaced the harsh beam of the flashlight. The flickering light made the room look different, warmer, softer, almost peaceful. Emily took a deep breath and smiled. "That's better." Daniel nodded. "You always had a way of making this place feel cozy, even during a storm." She looked at him, surprised. "You remember that?" "Of course," he said. "When I was a kid, I used to think you liked storms because you'd light all the candles and make hot chocolate. Dad would joke that you were trying to turn the blackout into a movie scene." Emily laughed quietly, the memory bringing a rush of warmth to her chest. "I guess some habits never change." He smiled, and for a brief moment, their eyes met steady, kind, but with something deeper behind them. Emily looked away first. She didn't want to read too much into that look. Didn't want to feel the strange flutter in her heart that came with it. He was family, after all. But it had been a long time since anyone had looked at her with that kind of attention. A sharp crack of thunder made them both jump, and then they laughed at the same time. The tension broke, and the house didn't feel so heavy anymore. Daniel looked around. "Want me to check the fuse box?" "Maybe it's just a breaker." "It's fine," she said quickly. "We'll wait it out. It's too wet outside." He nodded, then took one of the candles and set it near the living room window. The soft light glowed against the glass, reflecting both of their faces faintly. Outside, the rain kept falling in silver sheets, washing the street clean. Emily stood beside him, watching the storm. She could feel the air around them shift, something unspoken hanging there, gentle but real. It wasn't about attraction or romance exactly. It was about two people who had both lost someone, both standing in the same quiet space, realizing how empty it had felt until this moment. When Daniel turned to her and said, "You should sit down. I'll make sure all the windows are shut," she just nodded. She sat on the couch holding the candle, listening to the sound of him moving through the house. The light flickered across the walls, and she thought about how strange life was. One moment you're alone, the next someone catches you in the dark, and everything changes, not in a loud way, but quietly, like the way the rain changes the smell of the earth. That night, the storm outside kept raging, but inside, something small and soft had begun. Neither of them knew what it meant yet, but both felt it. Like a heartbeat under the sound of the rain, the storm outside raged like a living thing, pounding against the windows as thunder rolled over the hills. Inside the house, the air was thick with the scent of rain and melting wax. Claire placed 2 candles on the table, watching their flames tremble in the draft. The power was still out, but the faint light softened the walls, turning everything warm and quiet. Across from her, Ethan sat at the edge of the couch, running his fingers through his damp hair, lost in thought. The moment between them was heavy, not uncomfortable, but uncertain, like both were standing on the edge of something they didn't quite understand. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He looked up, startled by her voice, and nodded. "Yeah, just." "Strange night," he said with a small laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Claire noticed how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, a weariness that came from more than lack of sleep. She'd seen that look before on herself after losing his father. To break the silence, she brought out 2 mugs of tea. "It might not fix the power, but it helps with the cold," she said, trying to smile. He accepted the cup and smiled back, a little awkward but sincere. For a while, they just sat there, listening to the storm. It felt almost peaceful, two lonely hearts sharing the same quiet space. Ethan spoke first. You know, Dad used to make me sit through storms like this when I was little. Said it builds character. It chuckled. Then his voice softened. Guess I never learned to like them. Claire's chest tightened at the mention of her late husband, but she smiled gently. He always said that. He hated storms, but wanted to look brave in front of you. Ethan looked up, surprised. Really? She nodded. He'd grip my hand under the blanket every time thunder hit. He just didn't want you to see it. For the first time that night, Ethan laughed a real laugh, and Claire found herself laughing too. It was small, but it felt good. It was the first shared warmth they'd had in a long time. Minutes stretched quietly. The storm started to ease, the thunder moving further away. Claire leaned back, watching the candlelight flicker across Ethan's face. He looked older than she remembered, more man than boy now. The realization hit her in a quiet, emotional way. She had been so caught up in her own grief that she hadn't noticed how much he had grown, how much time had passed. He wasn't just her late husband's son anymore. He was a part of the family she had left.